Hello, listeners, and welcome to another Footnote episode of the Fancy Animation Podcast with me, Chris Holliday.
And me, Alex Sargent.
We are back in the world of, I want to say, psychoanalysis, so this is very much a sequel episode to our earlier, or Alex's earlier kind of working through of psychoanalysis. This episode, we're looking at the gaze. We wrestled a little bit before we started about how to frame this and kind of how to get into what I understand is going to be very Lacanian.
We left the last footnote talking and mentioning this guy called Lacan, and we said we might do something on Lacanian film theory.
We? I was going to say,
I think the gaze might be more what we're all after.
Yes,
and you and us.
Well, I was going to say, if listeners think, I wonder what Chris knows about, like, this is going to be very much again a kind of sequel to psychoanalysis. So listeners, listen to that one first, and then if you're thirsty for more, this is the episode for you. So we're going to do the gaze, and I think a lot of kind of people that have taught film studies are sort of, there'll be bits in here that you go, oh yeah, that's, so this is a kind of umbrella term, I guess, for lots and lots of different things, or the ways that teachers may have thought about or may have taught to their students ideas of spectatorship. Or so I'm going to leave it to you. I'll start the recording. We started the recording earlier on. Yeah. I will start the stopwatch. Yeah. Talk to me about the gaze.
Okay, so the gaze, if people are very new to sort of film and media studies, they might not know what on earth this means, but obviously to look at something, to gaze at something is a term they'll be familiar with.
Yep.
Those who even have a kind of, I don't know, if they've done A-level media studies will know about something called the gaze, which is the male gaze, which is one of the most famous essays in the history of film theory, right?
Yes.
I mean, there's a clip in Parks and Rec where it's cited. Like, it's when Andy from Parks and Rec is mentioning a film theory concept, you've made it. We wish we could have that kind of impact these days. So Laura Mulvey's notion of the male gaze is probably the most famous example of gaze theory, but really there are lots and lots of different examples. It's not just film, it precedes film. The way it's used is based on the psychoanalysis of a particular theorist named Jacques Lacan.
Yep.
So to try and unpack what the gaze is, we need to sort of understand what that term is, and then the kind of debate surrounding what that term is.
Yeah, because it's really interesting for having read. So, as you say, Laura Mulvey is to be looked at in this. I think a lot of us will have taught it, or a lot of us would have studied it. For me, it's really interesting that Mulvey and Tom Gunning, so Gunning, who did the Cinema of Attractions, an episode Footnote that we've done already, they are both writing within about a 7 or 8 year period from sort of the late 70s to the mid 1980s. And what's really interesting about that is that that's also the time where sort of spectacle and CGI is being sort of integrated into cinema. So you have this really interesting thing, and I think Thomas Elsasser says this. He's like, it's really interesting that the very reason scholars like Mulvey and Gunning are talking about attraction and spectacle and the idea of the kind of the gaze and the spectacular thing on screen is kind of almost informed by a filmmaking context that is returning to spectacle as a result of CGI.
Right. Yes. Okay. That's very interesting.
Thank you very much. That's all I've got to say.
I guess, so the only thing I would say on that is that probably mine and many psychoanalytic theorists' issue is that basically Mulvey's version of the gaze is now what people think the gaze is.
Okay.
And even Mulvey herself, I suspect, in fact, she has written comments in advance, suggests that's quite a limited view on what the gaze can be as a theoretical concept.
So what is her in a whistle stop minute, 2 minutes, because that's all we've got. Sure. Mulvey, so this is late 70s.
We got to go earlier than Mulvey, I'm afraid. So we have to go really fast.
Okay.
So very quickly, Lacan's view of the gaze.
Okay.
Lacan is a psychoanalytic film. He's a psychoanalytic theorist. He's not a film theorist. He's a psychoanalytic theorist. He says many things about lots of complicated stuff. But one of the things he talks about is this idea of the gaze. It runs throughout his work, and if anyone's ever tried to read Lacan, they will know, one, it's impossible to read. He doesn't write in a systematic manner. Most of his lectures are kind of, most of his works are kind of lecture notes and seminars he gave and talks and things like that. So it's hard to understand any kind of coherent understanding of his work.
Sure.
But there is a essay that everybody knows, anyone who knows anything about Lacan, there is an essay within film studies that's used all the time called the mirror stage, where he proposes a notion of the gaze whereby we look at the world, or we look at ourselves in the mirror and forge our conscious identity and our understanding of the world out of our ability to look at ourselves and see ourselves and forge concepts ourselves.
Okay.
So I think we don't have to go really into the murky world of that, if that will do as an explanation of what that is.
Yep.
But basically, at its simplest, the gaze is a way of seeing the world through the kind of paradigm of consciousness and concepts and ideas and things like that. It's not just looking, it's gazing.
Right. So this is 50s?
Yeah, 50s, 60s.
Okay,
yeah, 60s,
so
70s, yeah.
it seems like wrapped up in this kind of idea of the gaze is spectatorship, perception, subjectivity.
Yes.
All of those desire.
Ways of making sense of the world through looking.
You also said that You also said he's not a film theorist.
No.
How did he? What then happened?
Because film theorists love to read really complicated theory. I'm one of them. Love it.
Oh.
And find references to anything that can be visual or allude to the idea of cinema. We love it when that happens because that means we can suddenly do something with it, right?
Yeah.
And when you start talking about looking and mirrors and looking at ourselves in the mirror and seeing ourselves on screens and images, and here we go. Now we're cooking.
In this paper, I will.
Yeah. So quite understandably, early film theory that uses Lacan picks up this notion of the gaze from this essay called The Mirror Stage and starts to apply it to cinema. So in the gaze, in the mirror stage, we are looking at ourselves in the mirror and making the sense of the world through looking. Maybe we are doing the same in cinema, and therefore cinema relies on the same kind of conscious and unconscious processes that the mirror stage relies on. And there is this idea in early Lacanian theory, I stress the word early, that what we're doing with cinema is achieving a kind of mastery over the screen because we're kind of gazing at it rather than looking at it.
Okay, and who are the proponents of this early? So if Lacan is 50s, sort of 50s, 60s, by the 70s you've got Mulvey. So what's who are the other
Mulvey,
proponents?
Jean-Louis Baldry, Christian Metz, quite a lot of the early screen theorists, so sort of the British sort of 60s, 70s psychoanalytic writing in the journal Screen.
Okay.
They're all kind of going on this, and it's the 60s, it's the 70s, it's the height of kind of left wing, right wing tension.
Yeah.
They're politically aligned. Quite a lot of this is about like we need to understand the illusion of mastery that cinema is creating for us, so that we can smash the illusion and realize that actually we're all kind of being duped into this illusion of mastery.
Okay, when you said the 70s, it's a time of it's Moonraker, it's
Moonraker, but it's also Vietnam War, Taxi Driver, Easy Rider.
Yeah. Okay. Are you talking to me? Easy looking in the mirror.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So
smash the system.
That's early.
Right.
So what's you sort of hinted at and as you said, Mulvey herself has responded to her own work. Yeah. So what's happening now?
So here's the problem. Lacan writes this essay called The Mirror Stage, where he doesn't invent the notion of the gaze. It's a kind of recurring idea in philosophy and those stuff. But he kind of provides a psychoanalytic framework to talk about this idea of making sense of the world through gazing. Then he writes loads of other stuff where he really completely changes what he thinks the idea of the gaze is, or at least evolves it. And that work isn't really used, or it wasn't really used in the kind of early film theory. And basically, again, I'm trying to be as simple as possible. Colleagues listening who know more about this than I'm alluding to, please understand. I'm trying to keep things simple here.
Write a blog.
Basically, his shift in thinking is that he thinks about the gaze as something that belongs to us, the eye. We are gazing at the screen, and that's how we're kind of understanding the world. But actually he comes to think of the gaze as something that's coming at us rather than something we are putting on us.
Right.
So it's not that we are looking and gaining mastery over the world by looking. It's that we have a sense we are being looked at by the world. So back to the mirror image, it's not the image of us looking at the mirror that we should be worrying about. It's the image of the mirror looking back at us that we should be worrying about. That helps us position ourselves as subjects in the world. It helps us see ourselves as objects that are seen. So actually the gaze isn't something we have, it is something we react to.
It's interesting. It's a way of kind of talking about a lot of writing when people talk about cinema and subjectivity, and we've talked about this subjectivity, alignment, allegiance, all these different ways. Point of view is something that's used a lot in cinema, but
Yes.
it's very difficult to transform into an adjective. So people have talked about it in terms of the world as being focal. So it seems like the gaze is a way of talking about lots of different things that come under perception, and it's in and of itself, based on what you said, has changed over time.
Yes.
That it's about the formation of the self, not just because we gaze at something, but we are gazed at.
Exactly.
Right.
You are looking at me.
Yes,
I am gazing at you, and you are trying to figure out my gaze, and that is what's giving you subjectivity, not the ability to look
act
at
of
me.
doing. Yeah.
So that becomes a very different and slightly more complicated and slightly more contested and slightly more fraught understanding of the gaze than this kind of illusion of mastery that Mulvey talks about. So as soon as you start trying to think through how that might work, you go, hang on a minute, it's not that cinema, and Todd McGowan is the kind of key theorist on this, he puts it very eloquently, but it's not that we gaze at cinema, it's that cinema gazes at us. If we are affirmed in our identities at cinema, it's the feeling of being sort of asked. It's the feeling of being seen by the cinematic object rather than the feeling of us seeing the cinematic object. It's all very obtuse, I know, but it's really like it's a very different understanding, and this is what most later Lacanian work is doing.
Okay, so you've mentioned Beaudry, Metz, Mulvey, McGowan. Any other? Shout out to Ben Tyra, who's obviously written.
Yeah, I guess we're running out of time, right?
We are.
But to bring this to fantasy animation very quickly,
Yes.
because that's the kind of radical realignment you might have to do if you're interested in gaze theory. That starts to ask lots of questions about what the cinema is looking. What kinds of looking is the cinema doing at us? For example, is it different to be looked at by a fantasy movie than being looked at by a realistic movie, a socio-realistic movie? Is an animation capable of looking at us in the same way that photography is capable of looking at us? These are very interesting questions that we could dabble with and others might dabble with. In terms of theorists, Todd McGowan's The Real Gaze is really, really good. Ben Tyra is very good in our edited collection, actually, fantasy animation, thinking about this in terms of special effects and the kind of psychoanalytic paradigms of special effects. I have a fudge job of trying to do it in an edited collection called The Phallic Eye, where I try to kind of what would a Mulvey look like with a new kind of gaze, thinking about a very weird movie called Sucker Punch by Zack Snyder.
Yes, I remember that.
I'm not sure how successful I am, but I have a go at it there. There's other later Lacanian. Joan Kopczak is a great later Lacanian scholar who deserves a shout out because she does. Slavoj Žižek is a sort of the poster child of some of this stuff. That'll probably do.
Yeah, I was going to say we need the sequel to a sequel to cover everything. Great, so there we go. That is the gaze, I guess, in lots and lots of different forms with lots and lots of different names, ideas. Really useful. Really useful.
If you have other suggestions, or if none of that made any sense and you need me to clarify any of that, or don't want me to ever talk about that ever again and want me to talk about something else, or Chris, of course, then you know how to get in contact. fananimresearch@gmail.com. That's FANANIM research@gmail.com. We await your suggestions. We'd be delighted to do some more for you.
Bye.
Otherwise, we'll see you next time.
Bye.